This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
First and foremost, I want to thank Queens Jewish Center for inviting me, and of course for Chazak for just doing amazing things throughout the world, really. Even though they're centered in Queens, but you really hear about them throughout the entire spectrum of the Jewish world. It's just the Rav, it's just the Holy Assembly that we have here today. I want to share with you a few ideas, a few thoughts, especially coming to Rosh Hashanah. You know, during this time of the year, when people usually, get a little bit nervous, and rightfully so. It's, the time when Judgment Day, to the effect that next Sunday night, everything that's going to happen to you for the entire next year is going to be decreed during those next 2 days. So everything, whether the person is going to live, whether the person is going to die, God forbid, whether the person is going to be a multi-billionaire, whether the person is going to lose a lot of money, whether they're going to be healthy, whether they're going to be sick, whether they're going to be happy, there's so much going on. So there is something to be nervous about. There is something to be scared about. And then during this time also, you have what people usually do is they take upon themselves something, which is what you're supposed to do. They decide, okay, I'm going to be extra careful on this, I'm going to be extra careful on that, and in merit of this, may I have a good judgment. And this is very good, very important, but let's try to understand this. Like, really? Is that really going to make a difference? Like, God knows everything. God knows what you did even better than you think you know what you did. And God knows you better than your wife. God knows you the highest level possible. So all of a sudden you'd be like, well, okay, I am going to go and I'm going to make sure that when I daven, I'm going to daven with a little extra kavanah. Good job. Front row seat, you go, and now you're going to get a great judgment. I'm going to make a little extra kavanah when I'm doing brachos, and that's going to change my judgment day? That's going to change what's going to happen the next entire year? So this is a lot to think about. What does it work? Judaism doesn't just throw things out and be like, hey, fluff things up and do this, and then everything is going to go okay. So there's real deep reasons behind what we do and why we do it. And this is very, very imperative, and I hope for tonight when you leave, you'll take actually upon yourself something that you can stick with, something that you can change, something that will make you a better person, a better Jew. So now the idea behind this is the Karch Ve'ar, Rav Yitzchak Blazer goes and explains this based off a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. And he goes and he says that, how do you get a good judgment? What is the secret to a good judgment? And he goes on it's a long topic, we won't get into it at length, but we'll speak about it very briefly, that if you want to get a good judgment, the earlier that you prepare for judgment day, for the actual judgment, the better off that you are. Just something very, very important. We have to understand that if you start preparing, the earlier that you begin, so if you start tonight, you're better off than if you would have started tomorrow, and you're better off than somebody else who started tomorrow and the next day. So every minute, every second, every hour, every day, especially weeks and months, the earlier that you prepare, the better off that you're going to be. So now we can understand why people start taking upon themselves something. This is a way of preparation. We realize that Judgment Day is coming. We realize that God is going to decree upon us whether it's going to be an amazing, successful year, which we pray and hope that it will be, or whether it's going to be, unfortunately, the opposite of that. And if we have something that we could influence that, if you have the ability to influence a judge, wouldn't you do everything in your power to go and influence it? This is even more so if, let's say, you come before a judge in the, New York courts, whatever it is, in the federal, the state, doesn't matter. You're nervous about it. Even if it's just a ticket of, let's say, a parking ticket or a driving ticket, whatever it is, you're still a little bit nervous about it. And if you could prepare, imagine you know where the judge is and where the judge lives. I'm not going to get into little stalkerish problems, but imagine you know where the judge is. Let's just say maybe he's your neighbor. So what are you going to do to him the next morning that you see him? The judge, you know he is going to be there tomorrow or the next week, and he's going to be judging your case. You're going to show him the happiest, most friendliest neighborhood, not a Brooklyn or Queens. I'm talking about like an out-of-town type of friendlyhood. With the way that it works in New York, if you see your neighbor, you try to avoid all contact at all things. They're like, did he see me? I'm sorry. You run away. But you're going and you're like, oh, my dear neighbor, my best friend, I love you, I care about you. Here's your paper, I highlighted things that you might want to read. This is it. Here's some cookies that I baked. I learned how to bake. And you go on and you try to appease them. So if you do that for a judge, wouldn't it be even more so when you're coming in front of God? If you had a way to make your judgment better, wouldn't you jump on it and take it? Let's try to understand this. There was once a girl, comes from a very wealthy family. I'm not talking about I'm talking about wealthy, aristocrat, like old money. You're talking about it in the billions. And her father kept on setting her up with specific types of people, part of their circle. But it never really affected her. She would be someone who wanted to actually be, the whole love, the whole emotional. She needed that. When she went out with these type of guys, they're all talking about their Harvard business degree and the Yale and what they're going to do and their father's business. And, that's all they cared about. And she's like, that's not what I want. That's not what I'm looking for. So at the age of about 26, 27, guy after guy, she says, no, not interested, not interested, not interested. Finally, she's out to eat with a bunch of her friends at a restaurant, and a guy sees her in the distance, and the guy falls in love. First sight, he's like, that's going to be my wife. And he goes and he sends her over a drink, and, and she's like, listen, it ain't going to happen. You're you, I am me, we're in different worlds. She realizes this guy doesn't come from her circle. It's not going to happen. But the guy doesn't take no for an answer, and he says, well, all right, challenge accepted. And she's like, well, no challenge. I didn't challenge you. He's like, no, all right. And he walks away. And she's like, oh, great, what just happened? And this guy starts figuring out where she lives, and he starts sending her flowers to the house. And she ignores it. Finally, the father's like, what's going on over here? Every day you get flowers from this. Who is this guy? Like, I don't know, Daddy. I'm telling you, it wasn't me. This guy is going crazy over here. She goes, after a certain point, they just chuck out the flowers. Seeing that he's not getting any response, he decides he's going to up his game. He's going to go take it a step further. And what he does is now he figures out what she loves. What is important to her? What is something that she enjoys? And then that's what he's going to, and he did his recon, his research, and he was going around until finally he came across that she loves chocolate. And he's like, perfect. So now instead of flowers, he's sending her chocolate. But not just any chocolate. He gets the highest level Swiss chocolate. He flies it in from like the most expensive, like the Belgium, the highest of the high. And she gets the chocolate. For the first time, she's like, wait a minute, really? Is that? And then eventually she's like, well, this is good chocolate. And she starts eating it. And the eating turned into inhalation of chocolate. And eventually she's like day after day, she's getting more chocolate. And suddenly she's like, well, this guy really cares about me. This is after all what she was chasing after, love and the whole beauty of the relationship, the emotional aspect of it. So she goes to her father and says, listen, look at him. He obviously cares about him. Maybe we should actually set something up. And the father says, listen, it's different circles. Do you really want to live like that? This is not how you were raised. It's going to be difficult for you. But she convinces her father, says, at least make some phone calls. Do some research about this guy. So he says, fine. He calls the guys, rabbis, he calls the guys, background checks. And the father wasn't happy with what he found. He says, listen, this guy, there's something off with this guy. I don't like the responses that I got from, the people that I called about him. So fine. She dropped it. But again, the chocolates keep on coming, and the chocolates are getting bigger and more beautiful and more elaborate and more delicious. And finally, she's like, listen, he sends me so much, I'm not going to say thank you. So she calls him up and says, hey, listen, thank you for all the chocolates, but I just want you to let you know it's not going to happen. He's like, yeah, no, it's okay. It's like, you enjoy it. And, eventually they start talking a little bit. And she realizes that they actually have a lot in common. And they start talking more, and eventually, this is all behind the father's back. And eventually they start going out. And this goes on for a period of a few months. Finally, she's done. She fell in love already. That's it. The game is over. And she goes over to her father, and she breaks him the news. Says, listen, Daddy, I know that you told me, and I'm sorry, and this. And she says everything. She says, but what can I do? So we started off with just talking. And then we went out a few times. This guy gets me. I love this guy. And he says, Daddy, I know that you love me, and you want me to be happy. This is how I'm going to be happy. So the father thinks for a moment, and he's a smart man, and he says, listen, I know that what happens if a girl comes over and says, I really want to date this guy, and the father says, no, and she's already in love, then, there's going to be, anybody who's a parent knows what's going to happen next. So he decides, says, you know what? I'll let you go through with this, but there's a few contingencies. Number one, I told you I don't trust this guy, I still don't trust this guy. You love him, I'll respect him, but I don't trust him. I'm not going to bring him to my business. I have a few other small businesses. I'll give him one of the small businesses, but you should know that your lifestyle is going to be drastically reduced if you live, in that realm, in that world. And she thinks about it for a moment. She says, you know what? It's worth it for me. And then he goes in and he says, listen. He says, there's one more condition. With all the family money, and if you're marrying out of this types of circle, what we're going to do is you're going to get a trust fund, a $50 million trust fund, and that's it. Now she thinks for a second. That just shows you how much money they had. 50 million. She had to think about it. And then she says, you know what? Fine. You got yourself a deal. And she goes over to the boy and she says, you're not going to believe it. She says, we have our father's blessing. My father's blessing said that we could go through with it. So he goes and he says, this is unbelievable. And he's so excited. He's so pumped. He says, I'm going to make the greatest proposal ever. And he goes and he like hires like builders to build like a human-sized like chocolate fountain, like a real fountain. And you know, in there it's like spurting out all this like, you know, like chocolate from all different angles. And then what he does is he takes marshmallows, he takes one of those like sparkles, and he sticks them inside, and he writes, will you marry me, floating on the marshmallows with the sparkles, with the fire flying out. And she goes and she walks in and she sees all this, and he's on his knee, and she goes and she starts crying, and she's like, yes, 1,000 times yes, I want to marry you, we're going to have an amazing time. And they're going, and it's like premarital bliss. It's like unbelievable. They're in the clouds. She thinks that she's going to be on the highest level of marriage emotional connection possible. And they get married. And the first year was unbelievable. It was amazing. They had a little, you know, their little things that they did. And one of the things that they did is that before they would go to sleep, they would look in each other's eyes, smile, and say, I love you, good night. And that's what they did. And that was like their thing. The second year of marriage, something changed a little bit. She noticed that he is talking to the housekeeper, and he's saying, like, you know, my ties have to be this particular way, my cufflinks have to be this particular way, and he was very, very particular about it. But he wasn't talking the nicest way possible. So she goes over, she goes over to her husband, the wife, and she says, what's up with this? Like, why you care so much about the cufflinks, about the ties? And he's like, well, you know how expensive these are? He says, these are my prized possessions. He says, this is very, very important to me, and I need this, make sure that everything is exactly the same, almost OCD style. His ties had to be in a certain way, his cufflinks had to be in a certain angle. And he explained it to the housekeeper, but the housekeeper couldn't get it. 1 week after another, eventually he started screaming at her, eventually he fired her. And the wife was like, are you, you know, for like cufflinks? Really? Like, it made absolutely no sense to her. She didn't say anything. She was a good wife. She didn't want to, you know, ruffle anything, and she decided she's going to keep it closed. Then comes the next housekeeper. Didn't really work out so well either. Within a period of a few short years, they fired no less than 21 housekeepers. And finally, she came to the point, she's like, listen, what's going on? And she realized, like, his demeanor, the way that he dealt with her also changed. It became more coarse, more harsher. He wouldn't, you know, compliment her as much as he used to. He used to leave her chocolate, you know, everywhere throughout the house. And she would find it, smile, you know, leave her little, like, love you notes. That stopped happening as well. Finally, she says, what's up with your ties and clips? Like, why do you care so much about it? And this is the first time that he blew up at her, and he started screaming at her. He says, how dare you? You know how hard I work. I deal so every day. I leave early in the morning. I come home late at night, and they do it to support this family. And on and on and on he's going. And he says, if you can't respect me, the fact that I need to have my cufflinks in a certain way, and I need to have my ties in a certain way, then we have a big problem. And she was so taken aback. She's like, it's like, what? Like, you know, like, she never heard him speak like this. She's like, okay, you know, like, fine. And then the marriage started deteriorating. It became from worse to really, really bad. And eventually, as the years grew by and they had 4 children, they had 4 daughters, he started making some more money. And when he started making more money, he started getting new friends. And those friends weren't usually the best of friends. And they started off taking him to Atlantic City. Say, listen, and they introduced him to gambling. And he wasn't a good gambler, but he gambled. And that means that he lost a lot of money. And when he came home, who did he let it out on? His wife. His wife had the children. He started screaming, becoming a very, very difficult person to live with. And it became very, very difficult. Like, the fighting became so severe, so bad, that she couldn't handle it anymore. She's like, what's going on with you? And he kept on screaming back at her. Bottom line is, serious shalom bayis issues. Eventually, Atlantic City didn't do it enough for him, and when his wife went to the country for the summer, he went with his friends to Las Vegas and do a higher level of gambling. And that also lost him a lot of money. And then when he came back, he started arguing, and the fighting grew worse and worse and worse. Finally, as this only thing that happens is they start drifting apart. As they're drifting apart, she still loved him. She still cared about him. She still needed him, and she would send him letters, she would send him notes and be like, little like, I love you, and little, little chocolates, just to try to re-spark something that, that died. And as much as she tried, he ignored her. At first, she saw the letters. He saw the letters. He looked it up and says, hey, can we hang out? Can we go out? I love you. I care about you. I need you. And he goes and says, listen, I'm very busy. I have work and blah, blah, blah. He gave her all the excuses. And then the letters started taking a different turn. It went from first of like, hey, let's be together, to more of a begging. Please, I need you, she goes to him. I really need this. I really love you. I really care about you. Please, for my own sanity, please, let's just hang out. Let's go out. And he's like, I can't, I'm busy, I told you. And he starts getting angry with her again. Eventually, she stopped sending the letters. She stopped putting out the chocolate. And they started drifting even more apart. And the only time that they had a little bit of a connection was her birthday or anniversary. He would scribble a little Hallmark card, I love you, thank you, blah, 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 little, generic, and give it to her. And this is what she lived for. She cared about this. Because for some odd reason, she still loved him, she still cared about him. And she goes, and her 40th birthday comes around. And she's waiting for the birthday card. And the husband comes home really late at night, and she pretends that she's sleeping. Maybe he's going to slip a little card under her pillow, but nothing. And then she waits till the next morning. Maybe he's going to give me something now. But still nothing. He wakes up, rushes off to work. Comes home that night, doesn't even say happy birthday, as if he completely forgot. The next night says, okay, maybe he forgot. Maybe he's going to give it to me the next night. But the next night, also nothing came. And this is the first time in the marriage that she cried herself to sleep. And the night after that, she cried herself to sleep again. And the night after night, this is what kept on repeating. She kept on just crying herself to sleep. And she's like, what's going on over here? Like, where's my marriage? 2 years go by like this. He's cold to her, she's trying to, and nothing is going on. Finally, he gets a phone call while he's at work. And he says, listen, it's his wife on the other line. And she says, we need to talk. And he's like, yeah, I understand. Of course we need to talk, but I can't. I'm just too busy. And she's like, when you come home tonight, we need to talk. And he's like, I'm going to come home late. He's trying to avoid, he knew what was coming. And he wanted to avoid it at all costs. So every time that she brought it up, he ran away. Every time that she went and she said, oh, we really need to talk, he ran away. 6 months go by. And then she says, it's not going to happen. We're talking tonight. And he realized by the tone of her voice, tonight is happening. He says, fine. Let's talk tonight. He comes home from work. She's sitting over there, red eyes, nose with a red, bunch of tissues everywhere. And he goes over to her and he says, listen, before you say anything, let me speak. She doesn't say anything. And he goes over to her and he says, I think we should get a divorce. And suddenly her eyes swell up. She doesn't say anything. And as tears drip down her face, she nods her head and she's like, okay. She then thinks for 2 minutes, complete silence. And then she says, I have a condition. And he's like, okay, what's the condition? Let's get a divorce in 6 months. And he says, why push it off? Why wait? If we're going to get a divorce, let's get it now. Why are we going to string this along? And she said, I'll make it worth your while. Says, I have a trust fund under my name. And he's like, yeah, so what about it? It's yours. It doesn't have anything to do with me. And she's like, yeah. Says, if you give me a divorce in 6 months instead of now, half of it is yours. You're getting $25 million. He says, $25 million for 6 months worth of work, it's not so bad. He says, fine, you got yourself a deal. But then she says that there's another condition. And she said, we have 4 daughters. I want them to see that you actually care about me and love me and that we're separating on good terms. So every night when you come home, I want you to buy me something and bring it to me. And she said, I'll make it even easier for you. You don't even have to do any thought, I'm going to go and I'll send it to your office. All you got to do is whatever I send, you bring it to me when you come home. And then when you give me the present, you look into my eyes, you smile, and you say, I love you. And he says, fine, this is going to make you happy. It's going to make me $25 million. Go ahead, let's do it. So he's in the office the next day. He gets a beautiful bouquet of flowers. On the card, from your wife, for your wife. And he's like, oh. He's like, okay. He takes the flowers. He goes home, prepares his face. He walks up to his wife. All the daughters are sitting next to him, next to the wife. And he goes and he smiles to her, to the wife and says, I love you. Here it is for you. And the girls, for the first time in their life, they see that their father actually loves the mother. And this goes on for the next few weeks. Flowers come to the office. He goes. He brings it to the wife. The wife smiles. He smiles. They say, "I love you," and they go on. And meanwhile, the girls are so happy. Daddy loves mommy. Everything is amazing. Beautiful, beautiful in the house. And then the first month go by. Then the second month, she sends, instead of flowers, now she sends very expensive perfumes. And every day he's bringing home another $150 perfume, a $200 perfume. And he's like, what's she going to do with so many perfumes after 10 days? But he says, this is what she wants. She's paying for it. Fine, not a problem. They go and he gives her the perfume. She smiles. He smiles. They say, I love you. And they go on. And eventually, he looks, he starts looking into her eyes. And she's looking into his eyes. And then suddenly there's a little spark that comes in. He's like, oh, wait a minute. He's like, I remember this woman. I remember, that we once were in love. And then he's like, wow, look at all the wrinkles. She doesn't age well. Hasn't looked at her in years. And as the time goes by, day after day, he starts looking, and something starts moving inside of him, the perfumes. And then suddenly she decides, the third month, it becomes much bigger presents. Very, very expensive jewelry. And he decides, he starts feeling a connection back to his wife. And he says, today, let me do something extra. He goes home a little bit early. On the way, he stops by one of the places that he used to buy chocolate from. He buys a nice, extravagant, chocolate platter, and he decides to surprise his wife. He walks into the house. No one's home. The kids aren't home from school yet. No one's home. He's searching from room to room. No one's there. And he's searching for his wife. Suddenly, he hears somebody in the bedroom. He goes up to the bedroom, and he hears somebody is in his walk-in closet, his and hers walk-in closet. And he's like, well, who's in my closet? And he walks into the closet, and he sees his wife over there setting up his cufflinks and his ties. And he's standing over there, and he's like, what are you doing? And she's like shocked. She didn't even hear her come in. And she's like, oh, I was just setting it up. And he's like, yeah, but we have a housekeeper for that. Why are you doing that? And she's like, well, the housekeepers don't really do it the way that you like. And he's like, so you've been doing my ties? You've been doing my cufflinks? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, why? And she answers him, because I love you. I care about you. And he's like, yeah, but why? He's like, because, I need you. And he couldn't figure it out. He's like, yeah, but why? Like, we're obviously, you obviously see that I don't love you. You obviously see that we're not in the same connection. Why? And she's like, to be honest, I don't know. I have a connection. You're my soulmate, whether you like it or not. I love you. I care about you, and I need you. And he's very emotionally taken back by this. And he's like, and he gives her the jewelry that she bought for herself, and then he gives her the chocolate. And she says, listen, wait, give it in front when the kids come. So he waits, and then the kids come, they have dinner, and then he brings her they look into each other's eyes, he gives her the present, the chocolate, and he goes into her eyes and says, I love you. And then he added a few things. He's like, thank you. Thank you for doing everything that you've done for me. And this is the first time that he felt a tear come into his eyes in years. And as a man usually does, he quickly wipes it away and, says allergies and walks off. The next day, it really bothered him. His wife really cared about him so much. So he decided to, not only the presents that she bought for herself, he brought his own presents. And eventually, this thing started becoming more emotionally attached. Finally, he goes over to her after the 4 months, and he says, listen, I think we need to talk. And she says, okay. And he starts apologizing. He's never apologized before. He says, I'm really sorry the way I treated you. I realize that you care about me, you love me, and I realize there's something that I missed over here. And for the first time hearing this, that's coming from his heart, she was completely taken aback. She started crying. And she couldn't compose herself. After a few minutes, she says, you know what? There's something that I do need to tell you. She runs upstairs. She comes back down 2 minutes later with a bunch of papers. And she's shaking, and she's white. And she hands him the papers. And he's like, what is this? And she couldn't talk. She was crying. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't talk. She couldn't express herself. So he looks at the papers, and he scans them. And he sees it's from the hospital. And inside, he sees stage 4. And then he looks at somewhere else. He sees there's something of prognosis, 6 months. And then he starts shaking. He turns white. He's like, what is this? And finally, she gets herself put together, and she's like, for the past 2 years, I've been diagnosed with, unfortunately, the machla, cancer. And he's like, why didn't you tell me this? And she said, I tried to talk to you for so long. And he's like, so what does this mean? We'll call your father, we'll get the best treatment. And she says, my father's on it, we got the best treatment. There's nothing to talk about. She says, you can see the doctors, they gave me 6 months to live. And he's like, but when did you get this? When was this? She said, 4 months ago. And he couldn't handle it. He's like, what was it? And he couldn't bring it. He started walking around. He's like, no, that's not possible. He says, you're my wife. I love you. I care about you. How can you just do it? And he couldn't bring himself. And all of a sudden, there was a rush of emotions that came to him that he never understood and never felt before in his life. And then for the first time in his life, he broke down like a baby. He broke down and he started crying and crying and crying, to the point that he goes over to his wife. And he says, I will turn every stone. I will do everything I can to make sure that you will be healthy and you'll be able to see the children grow up. And she's like, listen, I love you, I care about you, I appreciate it, but it's not going to happen. I came to terms with it, and I think you should too. But he couldn't. He calls the office, he says, I'm taking off for the next 2 months. I'm not coming in. And the next morning he goes and he wakes her up, he brings her breakfast in bed, the chocolatey goodness that he could ever think of, like everything to the best, and he wakes her up with the most delicious breakfast that she could ever think of, with notes of I love you, I care about you, I'm sorry. And she's so emotional, she's like this is all I ever wanted, and she's crying and appreciating it. And then he brings her the presents, but he continues bringing her presents, but not just the presents that she wants, gives her presents after present. And then he goes and he asks her, says, tell me, what do you want? Why do you need all these presents for if you're not going to be here to enjoy them? So she says, come. And she brings him to her closet. In her closet, there are 4 baskets. And she says, every time that you give me a present, I put it in one of these baskets. And each of the baskets are named after one of their daughters. She says, I'm not going to be here to raise them. And I know they're going to have to live up and grow up by themselves and think of me and remember me for what I was. This is, I want them to remember me as a loving wife, not only a loving mother. I wanted them to remember me that I cared about you and everything was all going to be okay. And says, that's why I wanted you to give me a present every single day. This is not for me. I know I wouldn't be able to use it, but I wanted it for my daughters. I wanted them to see that Daddy loves Mommy, that Daddy cares about Mommy, and then in turn, that when I pass, that they'll get something to remember me by, and remember this relationship by. And he just breaks down again. And this went on for the next 2 months, and every day he would bring her another breakfast, lunch in bed, and they would go out, and they had the greatest time. But eventually she got weaker and weaker. And the 2 minutes that they would, spend looking each other's eyes turned into a half hour. And every time they would look into each other's eyes, each eye would swell up with tears and slowly drip down. And then one morning he wakes up, as usual, to get her breakfast. He brings her in bed and he taps her and he's like, honey, I have your breakfast. She's not moving. And he taps her again. He's like, honey, breakfast is here. She's not budging. And he looks at her face and he breaks down. He calls out Tzala, he calls out, he realizes it's over. When we come to Rosh Hashanah, our soul, our neshama, that's the girl. Our body, that's the guy. And we come and we realize, that we have something that we don't deserve. This guy knew that he didn't deserve her. He knew that she was out of his league. And that's how we should feel also. Our body does not deserve our soul, our neshama is chelek elokam mimala. It's part of God. We don't deserve it. But instead of treating it right, you know what we tell our soul? I'm busy, I'm working. I can't deal with you right now. We'll deal with it later. But the soul starts screaming, be like, please, I love you. I care about you. I need you. Let's spend some time together. And he says, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm busy, I'm working, I need to support the family. I can't deal with you right now. And then a few times a year, there's a little spark, the birthdays, the anniversary, otherwise known in the Jewish calendar, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, high holidays, where there's a little bit of a connection. There's a little spark that comes back. And we're like, okay, yeah, let's do this Judaism thing. Let's become more religious. Let's become closer to God. But even that drifts away. And even that, unfortunately, gets less and less as we get older if we don't keep the spark alive. Until one time, we finally tell the soul, listen, we need to talk. You do you, I do me, I think we should see other people. It's like, this is not working out. And then the soul says, okay, listen, let's just do this. Every night, look into my eyes, smile, say I love you. It's what's called Kriyat Shema. Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. We go and we say to God, I love you. I care about you. I need you. I want you. And all of a sudden, when we start redoing this, we start looking into the eyes of the Holy Torah, we start looking into the eyes of God, of our soul, we realize, wait a minute, there was something here. I see now what I loved you. I see now what we once had. And we realize why we fell in love in the beginning. We realize why we had such a strong connection. But unfortunately, if we don't wake up, then one day it's going to be too late. Because the soul is going to be in the next world already. And by the time that we want to change ourselves, it's going to be game over. So when we're coming to Rosh Hashanah, we're coming to the high holidays, this is the time that we are able to go and spark something inside of each and every single one of us. To do something different. To show our soul, to show our part of God in us. To say, you know what, I love you. I care about you. How? I'm going to take upon myself something. Yeah, God gives us the 613 commandments. As if the wife goes and sends and says, hey, listen, I'm going to pay for everything. God gives us all the money. As if we buy a very expensive lulav and esrog. We'll be like, well, look, God says I gave you the money. I basically send you the lulav and esrog and you bought it. But then comes the time and says, you know what, this is great, but let me do something for you. Let me give you a chocolate. Let me do something above and beyond that I usually do. And that's what we come to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, we take upon ourselves something. Yom Kippur, we say, okay, let me do something better. Maybe I'm going to be more modest. Maybe I'm going to learn more Torah. Every Jew, every man has to go and make sure that he learns every single day. He says, you know what? Let me show God that I love him. Let me show God that I'm in it. Not after when it's too late. Unfortunately, when somebody's at 120 and they get diagnosed with, unfortunately, who knows what. And then they realize, okay, let me think about God. Let me think about what's going to be in the next world. So no, let's wake up early. Let's make sure that when we come to Judgment Day, we show God, I'm here because I love you. I'm here because I care about you. I am here because I want to do what's right. And that's why we take things upon ourselves. We're getting in line early on coming Rosh Hashanah. We're saying, God, I'm here and I'm ready. What does that show? That shows God that you're interested in this relationship. It says, oh, this is going to work out great. All of a sudden, this is like a bribe, if you can say that. You get a better judgment. So comes Rosh Hashanah. It's coming. This is it. This is when we have the final time. We have to think upon ourselves. After you hear every shir Torah, every class, every lecture, you could always leave with something. So there's a few different types of people that come to classes. One come, they listen, and they leave. Gaining nothing, or losing nothing. Some come, don't listen. Why they come? May God bless them. Whatever it is. Then you have people that come and be like, you know what? Let me do something with that. Let me utilize this. They have people that you pay them, tens of thousands of dollars to be motivational speakers. If the motivational speaker comes and you get motivated, but you don't do anything with it, you just flush that $50,000 down the drain. So you have the opportunity tonight. Starting tonight, you have the opportunity to show God that you mean business. To show God, I care. I love you. Let me do something extra. In the merit of this, may we all be blessed with an amazing and a successful year. With full of bracha and parnasa and health and shalom bayis and nachas from the children and everything that we all ever wanted, may God grant us. Because we come there and we're showing, I care about you. And God's going to say, you don't understand. I love you so much more than you think you love me. And the merit of that, maybe we really have an amazing and a successful year.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.